I am Safia Danjuma, and I am 33 years old. For most of my life, I believed silence was the highest form of strength. I was raised to think that enduring pain quietly made a woman honorable, that asking too many questions made her disrespectful, and that confronting wrongdoing, especially inside marriage, was a dangerous thing. In Marua town, where I grew up and still live, people respected women who bent without breaking and praised men no matter how loudly they ruled their homes. I followed those rules faithfully, never imagining that one day, my voice would shake the very foundation of the community that taught me to stay quiet. Before this story goes any further, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. These stories are not just entertainment. They are voices that were once silenced, and your support helps them reach people who need courage, healing, and truth. Marua town sat between dusty roads and growing estates, a place where tradition and modern life lived side by side but rarely agreed. People knew each other's business. Marriages were treated like sacred contracts that could never be questioned, and reputation was valued more than justice. I worked as a primary school teacher at New Dawn Academy, a modest but respected school near the town square. Teaching was not just my job, it was my identity. I taught with patience, corrected gently, and often spent my own small salary buying notebooks and food for children whose parents struggled. People called me kind. Some called me too soft. No one knew how much I endured at home. My husband, Hassan Lawal, was charming in public and unpredictable in private. When we first married, he laughed easily and promised me stability. He spoke of business ideas, investments, and a future that glittered with confidence. I believed him. I trusted him with my savings, my peace, and my silence. When I noticed small changes, money missing, sudden anger, unexplained nights away, I told myself marriage required patience. At first, it was gambling. Just once in a while, he said. Every man needs release. I swallowed my fear and nodded. But gambling grew into debt, and debt grew into secrets. Money meant for rent disappeared. Funds I had saved for school supplies vanished overnight. When I asked questions, he accused me of disrespect. When I cried, he mocked my weakness. Still, I stayed quiet, hoping love would change him. The night everything broke open, the sky itself seemed angry. Rain fell hard over Marua town, pounding rooftops and flooding the narrow roads. That evening, I finally spoke, not loudly, not in accusation, but with a trembling honesty that had been building inside me for years. I begged Hassan to stop. I reminded him of the children I taught, the respect we once had, the future slipping through our fingers. He didn't hear love. He heard exposure. His face hardened, his jaw tight with rage. Without warning, he shoved me toward the door. My back hit the wooden frame, pain flashing through my body before I even understood what was happening. The door slammed shut behind me, locking with a sharp click that echoed louder than the thunder. I stood outside barefoot, rain soaking through my clothes, my heart pounding with disbelief. I screamed, not because I wanted attention, but because I was afraid. Lights flickered on in nearby houses. Curtains moved. Voices murmured. Someone shouted my name. Within minutes, neighbors gathered under umbrellas and doorways, shocked at what they were witnessing. Someone called the police. When officers arrived and demanded Hassan open the door, he refused at first. But authority does not negotiate with pride. They forced their way inside. What they found was not just gambling money. Hidden beneath furniture, tucked behind boxes, and buried in corners were bundles of cash, neatly wrapped, suspicious, dangerous. This was not money won from cards. It was stolen, dirty, connected to deals that could ruin lives. The officers exchanged looks, realizing they had walked into something far bigger than a domestic dispute. I stood shivering in the rain as my world collapsed and rebuilt itself at the same time. That night, Hassan lost his freedom, and I lost my silence. Word spread quickly through Marua town. By morning, everyone knew my name, not as the gentle teacher, but as the woman whose pain exposed a dangerous secret. Some whispered with admiration, others with fear. But no one could deny the truth anymore. I thought my story would end there. I was wrong, because when one woman speaks, others begin to remember their own buried truths. Across town lived Lamia Sadiq, a quiet woman whose late father had left her a stretch of fertile farmland outside Garin Kudu village. That land was her inheritance, her father's legacy. Her husband, Musa Karim, sold it secretly without her consent. When she confronted him, her voice shaking but firm, he felt humiliated. That night, he dragged her to the door and locked her outside. Neighbors watched in disbelief as Lamia stood in the cold night, wrapped in nothing but shame and courage. Whispers turned into action. Police arrived. Inside the house, officers uncovered forged documents. The land legally belonged to Lamia. Moose's scheme collapsed in front of everyone. His pride vanished as fast as his lies. Lamia stood tall, humiliated but unbroken. Then there was Zainab Orji, who prepared a beautiful feast for her 5th wedding anniversary in Oak Ridge Estate. She cooked all day, decorated carefully, and wore a dress chosen with love. During dinner, she gently asked her husband, Daniel Orji, about his late nights. He answered with rage. In front of guests, he dragged her outside and locked the door. Laughter turned to horror. Calls were made. Police arrived. Inside the house, officers found another woman hiding in a room, his secret exposed without mercy. Zainab walked away that night, not broken but awakened. At Unity Market, Halima Bello, a hard-working trader, confronted her husband for stealing her daily earnings. When he locked her out of the shop in front of customers, market women refused to stay silent. They protested. Police searched the shop and uncovered stolen money belonging to multiple traders. One woman's courage ignited many. In a grand mansion on Hillcrest Avenue, Ruth Caldwell confronted her husband, a respected councilman, after discovering missing public funds. He tried to silence her by locking her outside. Security guards called the police. Documents revealed years of corruption. The powerful fell. The brave rose. Each story followed the same cruel pattern. A woman questions wrongdoing. A man feels exposed. Violence follows. Truth answers back. By the time my own case reached court, I realized my story was not unique. It was connected. We were all linked by pain, courage, and the refusal to remain silent. I was no longer just Safia the teacher. I had become part of something bigger. A movement born from broken doors, locked gates, and voices that refused to die in the night. And this is only the beginning. The morning after everything changed, Marua town did not wake up the same way it always had. The air felt heavier, like the town itself was holding its breath. People stepped out of their houses more slowly, eyes sharper, ears more alert. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps, and every corner carried a version of the same story, about broken doors, police sirens, hidden money, and women who had finally spoken. For me, the silence inside my house was louder than any storm. I sat alone on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, staring at walls that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Hassan Lawal was gone. His clothes still hung in the wardrobe, his shoes lined up by the door as if he might return at any moment. But the space he left behind was not empty. It was crowded with memories, fear, relief, and a question that refused to leave my mind. What happens to a woman after she tells the truth? At school, news reached before I did. When I walked into New Dawn Academy, teachers stopped talking. Some smiled gently. Others avoided my eyes. Children ran toward me, clinging to my hands like always, unaware of how close their teacher had come to losing herself. Their innocence grounded me. It reminded me why I spoke in the first place. But not everyone was pleased. That afternoon, a group of elders summoned me to the community hall. The building was old, painted cream and brown, with wooden benches polished smooth by decades of judgment. Men sat in a line, their faces serious, their hands folded as if they were about to pass a sentence. Safia, one of them began, "What you did has brought shame to your home." I felt my chest tighten. They spoke of marriage, of patience, of respect, of how matters between husband and wife should never reach the ears of outsiders. Not once did they speak of the money Hassan hid. Not once did they mention the shove, the rain, the locked door. I listened quietly. Then I stood. With respect, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Silence did not protect me. It protected crime. The room fell silent. I walked out knowing I had crossed a line that could never be erased. And I was not alone. Across town, Lamia Sadiq was facing her own storm. The farmland dispute had gone public, and her husband Musa Karim was fighting desperately to salvage his reputation. He claimed misunderstanding. He claimed paperwork confusion. But documents do not lie. Villagers who once greeted him with smiles now turned away. Children whispered. Elders questioned him. Lamia, once invisible, was suddenly seen everywhere, walking through the village with her head high, her father's name spoken with renewed respect. But courage comes at a cost. Late one evening, Lamia received threats. Anonymous messages warning her to remember her place. She shook when she told me, fear flashing in her eyes, but her voice was firm. I will not return to silence, she said. Neither would I. At Unity Market, the energy had changed too. After Halima Bello exposed her husband's theft, market women formed a loose circle of protection around one another. They counted money together. They spoke louder. They challenged men who had grown too comfortable taking what was not theirs. One afternoon, as I walked past the stalls, Halima grabbed my hand. Before, she said, we thought we were weak because we were alone. Now we know we were only silent. Her words stayed with me. Not everyone welcomed this change. At Oak Ridge Estate, Daniel Orji's family rallied around him, blaming Zainab Orji for his exposure. They said she embarrassed him. They said she destroyed her own marriage. They ignored the woman found hidden in his home, the lies that collapsed in front of witnesses. Zainab moved out quietly, carrying only what she could fit into 2 bags. I visited her once, sitting beside her on a thin mattress in a friend's spare room. I loved him, she whispered, staring at the wall. But I love myself more now. That was a new kind of language for women like us. Meanwhile, the case against Ruth Caldwell's husband shook the town's political ground. The councilman's corruption files spread beyond Marua, reaching regional offices. People protested outside the community hall. For the first time, power looked fragile. Ruth received both praise and threats. Some called her a hero. Others called her a traitor. She told me something I will never forget. They fear us because we know the truth, she said. And truth does not kneel. As these stories collided, something unexpected happened. Women began coming to me. Teachers, traders, housewives, young girls, elderly widows. They knocked on my door at night, voices shaking, eyes darting toward the road as if shame itself might be watching. They spoke of hidden abuse, stolen inheritances, forged signatures, beatings disguised as discipline. I listened. I did not judge. I did not interrupt. And slowly, the weight of it all settled on me. This was bigger than my marriage. This was a system. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the call to prayer echoed through Marua town, a police officer came to see me. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like stepping stones. Mrs. Danjuma, he said, your husband is cooperating. He is naming others. My stomach dropped. Hassan was talking. Businesses. Middlemen. Deals that reached deeper than anyone imagined. Gambling had only been the surface. Underneath was a network that fed on secrecy and fear. I realized then that the danger was not over. It was only changing shape. That night, fear returned, not as a storm, but as a quiet knock on my door. I did not open it. The next morning, a note lay at my gate. Some doors should never have been opened. I folded the paper slowly, my hands trembling. But instead of stopping me, it hardened something inside my chest. In Garan Kudu village, Lamia received a similar message. At Unity Market, Halima's stall was vandalized. Zainab's friend was warned to control her mouth. Ruth's name was dragged through radio gossip. The backlash had begun. We gathered one evening in a small room behind a tailoring shop. 5 women bound by truth and fear. No cameras. No speeches. Just whispered plans and shared resolve. We cannot fight alone, Ruth said. And we cannot go back, Lamia added. Silence settled over us like a vow. As weeks passed, the town shifted again. More investigations opened. More men were questioned. More secrets surfaced. Each revelation angered some and empowered others. I felt watched everywhere I went. But I also felt supported. Children waved at me with pride. Women squeezed my hand in passing. Even some men nodded quietly, their respect cautious but real. I learned then that courage does not roar. It spreads. And yet, deep inside me, a question still burned. How far would the truth go? And what would it demand from us before this was over? By the time the truth reached its loudest point, Marua town no longer pretended nothing was happening. Silence had cracked. The fear that once lived quietly behind closed doors now walked openly in the streets, uncertain of where to hide. Investigations spread like wildfire, and with each passing week, another carefully protected secret collapsed. For me, the days blurred together. Court dates. Meetings. Whispers. Nights where sleep refused to come. I had never imagined that speaking the truth would require this much strength long after the words were already spoken. Yet every morning, I reminded myself why I stood where I stood. Because going back was no longer an option. The first major breakthrough came when Hassan's confession was officially recorded. The police invited me to the station, not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as a witness. Sitting across the table from officers, I listened as they laid out what they had uncovered. My husband's dealings were tied to a wider network of illegal transactions involving stolen funds, forged documents, and manipulated properties. Some of the names mentioned were men I recognized, men who once sat proudly in the front rows of community meetings and religious gatherings. Powerful men. Men who believed silence would protect them forever. But silence had turned against them. News of the arrests spread quickly. Radios crackled with breaking reports. Phones buzzed with forwarded messages. In tea shops and market stalls, people spoke openly for the first time about corruption, abuse, and betrayal. It was uncomfortable. It was chaotic. But it was real. And in the middle of it all stood women who had once been invisible. Lamia Siddique's farmland case reached the regional court. On the day of the verdict, villagers filled the courtroom, standing shoulder to shoulder. The judge's voice was calm, steady, and final. The land was declared legally hers. Every forged signature was exposed. Every lie collapsed under documented truth. When Lamia stepped outside, sunlight hit her face and she cried, not from pain, but from release. Women surrounded her, ululating softly, their voices trembling with pride. For generations, daughters had been robbed quietly. That day, a daughter reclaimed what was hers in full view of the law. At Unity Market, the traders' protest evolved into something permanent. The women formed an association, pooling resources and demanding legal protection. Halima Bello, once humiliated in public, was elected their representative. She stood before a crowd with a megaphone, her voice no longer shaking. "We are not weak," she said. "We were just unheard." Men who once mocked them now kept their distance. The market changed, not overnight, but unmistakably. Trust was rebuilt carefully, this time guarded by collective strength. Zainab Orji finalized her separation quietly. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public apology. Just papers signed and doors closed. She returned to school, finished her certification, and began teaching again. Children adored her. They didn't know her story, but they felt her strength. One afternoon, she told me something that stayed with me. "Losing him was not my failure," she said. "Losing myself would have been." The most dangerous chapter unfolded when Ruth Caldwell's case reached national attention. Her husband's corruption was deeper than anyone imagined. Funds meant for hospitals, clean water, and schools had vanished for years. Protests erupted. Officials were suspended. An independent investigation committee was formed. Threats intensified. One night, Ruth's house was surrounded by police protection. I sat beside her on the couch as she stared at the door, jaw tight. "They will try to break me," she said calmly. "But I am already broken open. There is nothing left to fear." Weeks later, her husband was formally charged. The same man who once silenced rooms with his voice now stood wordless in court. When the verdict was announced, the crowd erupted, not with joy but with relief. Justice, delayed, had finally arrived. For me, the final confrontation came unexpectedly. Hassan requested to see me. The officer who delivered the message watched my face carefully, ready to stop me if I refused. I surprised even myself when I agreed. The visiting room smelled of disinfectant and regret. Hassan sat across from me, thinner, quieter, stripped of the confidence that once filled every space he entered. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't think you would go this far," he finally said. I met his eyes. "I didn't think you would push me out into the rain," I replied. Silence stretched between us. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of being exposed." "So was I answered. "The difference is I chose truth." He nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding a lesson far too late. When I walked out of that room, something inside me closed, not with bitterness, but with peace. I no longer needed his understanding. I had found my own. Life did not suddenly become perfect. Some people still whispered. Some friendships faded. Some doors closed quietly. But new ones opened. I returned fully to teaching, this time with a deeper purpose. I began hosting small after-school sessions, not just for children, but for young girls. We talked about confidence, about boundaries, about speaking up. Not rebellion, just truth. Parents noticed the change. So did the girls. One evening, the women who had walked this path with me gathered again. This time not in fear, but in celebration. We sat in a modest hall decorated with simple lights. No speeches were planned. No cameras invited. Yet when Lamia stood up, everyone grew quiet. What we did was not easy, she said. But it was necessary. We stood when silence was expected. And because of that, others will stand taller. We held hands. Not as victims. As survivors. Maroa town would never be the same again. And that was not a tragedy. It was growth. Children grew up seeing women protected by law, not trapped by shame. Men learned that authority without integrity collapses. Elders began choosing justice over image. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably, things changed. As for me, I no longer introduced myself as the woman who exposed her husband. I was simply Safia Danjuma, a teacher, a truth teller, a woman who refused to disappear. In the end, I learned something powerful. Courage is not loud. It is steady. It begins the moment you decide your pain will not be wasted. And if you are reading or listening to this story right now, know this, your voice matters too. Silence protects injustice. Truth breaks it. Thank you for staying till the end. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps these real stories reach hearts that still need courage. See you in the next story.